Thank you. Thank you, Gonzalo, for that kind introduction. And Stephanie, I think Lockheed Martin just announced that they have their commercial jetpacks. They're a little expensive right now, but I think they're developing it pretty good. And Mario, thank you very much, and to the whole Hispanic Googlers Network for extending this invitation. Also to my colleague, Yvonne Cagle from NASA Ames. She's the one that actually put us in contact, and she sent me the original email. And of course, when they said Google, I said, hey, I'm interested in seeing what you guys are doing over here. And let me tell you, I spent the whole morning here, and I want to come work with you guys. I mean, it's a neat place. You know, you think NASA is neat. You guys have it all, man. It is neat. I think my colleague Ed Liu already beat me to it, though. I think you guys already have your quota of 1 astronaut. So whenever he moves on, just make sure you guys give me a call, right? But this is going to be a little bit like church, okay? You know, I have a treat for you guys at the very end. You know, but first you got to listen to the sermon, okay? The treat at the very end is going to be I have about an 18-minute video that summarizes my mission from last year. It was I'm on board STS-128 Discovery, and it was from August 28th of last year through September 11th. And we went all the way up to the International Space Station, connected with them, and we formed a group of 7 of us from my crew and 6 from the station. 13 of us were up in space simultaneously, and which was something very incredible. But before I do that, I think I need to tell you a little bit about myself so that you guys can better appreciate what you guys are to the community. Like it or not, I think you guys are role models to our community, and I'm sure the 80-20 that you guys have the ability here, a lot of you choose to use that 20 to go out in the community and do some good in terms of influencing our kids to get into science, technology, engineering, and math, get into the STEM fields. And I think that is very important. I think you know, I was listening to the White House when they had this event for community colleges, and I think it was Jill Biden said some quote that really stuck to me, and that is the countries that out-educate us today are going to out-compete us tomorrow. And it's very important that we engage our kids into the STEM fields if we're going to remain competitive on a global basis. And so that's sort of the soapbox that I'm going to get into that you guys are going to have to put up with for the next 15, 20 minutes, and then I'll give you guys the treat, all right? As was mentioned, I come from a typical migrant farm working family. I'm first generation. I was born here in the States. And so you would say, well, you know, what's a typical migrant farm working family? And let me paint the scenery for you. It's actually quite simple. My parents came from Michoacan, the state of Michoacan in Mexico. If you balance Mexico on a pin, that center of mass there, that's where Michoacan's at. So we're dead center in Mexico. And every year, my dad would load up the kids in the car. It was 4 of us, and I was the youngest one. Would load up the kids in the car, mom as well, and we would make a 2-day trip through Mexico, northern Mexico, all the way up to Southern California. We would reach Ontario, near Los Angeles, and we would spend about a month and a half there picking strawberries. That's how we would start the season. Then about a month and a half later, we would drive up to Salinas, and then we would pick lechuga, which is the lettuce. We would work in the hoeing with respect to thinning out sugar beets and whatever it was they were planting. And then after that, we would then, 2 months later, move up to the Stockton area, Stockton, Tracy, Modesto, and we would hang out here the bulk of our time, start working and picking cucumbers, tomatoes, cherries, anything that was in season, we picked it. And then after that, November would roll around, and now we would make what would be a 2.5-day trip back to Mexico. And we would cool our heels between November and February in Mexico, and then that process would begin again. And we would do that year after year. So you can see that is why it took me until I was 12 years old to dominate the English language. I mean, I was being pulled out from different school districts throughout the year, and so there was very little stability. And And so I remember that one thing that my parents did different than what a typical migrant farm working family was, in spite of their third grade education, was that they put a lot of emphasis in education. They didn't understand it, but they knew it was something good. And so Monday through Friday, wherever we were in school. And Saturday, Sunday rolled around, wherever we were working right aside mom and dad in the fields, trying to supplement the family income. And while a lot of kids looked forward to summer vacation, the Hernandez kids kind of hated summer vacation because we knew what that signified. That represented we had to be out there in the field 7 days a week, so that was no fun. I also remember that my parents were very, very smart. I swear they would have made great psychologists because one of the things that they always did is they did little things that kind of had a strong message with respect to education. I remember every day when we used to, it almost turned out to be a game, but whenever we used to go home after a long day's work, for example, if we were picking cucumbers, you wear Levi's, and they get muddy in the morning and then they dry up during the day. The sun bakes them. I remember when we used to go home, us kids used to play games, see who could make their Levi's stand up on themselves, because that's, and we used to kid around that, that's the person that worked the hardest that day, but actually I always won because I was always rolling around in the mud because I was the youngest one, right? So, but anyway, I remember every day my dad used to, we used to get in the back seat of the car after a long day's work. We were hot, sweaty, dusty, and before he start the car, and like I said, we used to make this a game because we said, he's gonna forget today, he's gonna forget. And before he put the key in the ignition, he would look back and say, how do you guys feel today? And that was the message every day. And of course, we would always say, well, we're tired. And he said, well, good. He says, remember this feeling. He says, because if you don't go to school, I'm not going to force you to go to school, but if you don't go to school, get good grades, this is what you're going to do the rest of your life. And so it was pretty powerful message. Also, I remember each time we came home from school, my mom would always sit us on the kitchen table, while she made her homemade tortillas and food for us to eat after school. She made sure that we finished our homework. And she helped us with our homework up to the third grade. After the third grade, since that's all she went to school for, she couldn't help us anymore. But it only took me once, though. I figured out she was smart enough not to help us, but she was smart enough to realize that to know if we finished our homework or not, because it only took me one test to test her out on that, and a visit with the belt to not try it again. So I made sure I did finish my homework every day. But things, that's how it was when I was was small as I remember it. And things actually changed a bit when I was in the second grade. I mentioned I was the youngest in the family, and I was in second grade. November rolled around, and it was time to go to Mexico, right? And here we were in Stockton, and my teacher my dad tells me, hey, we're getting ready to go to Mexico, like he always did every year. Get 3 months worth of homework, because when we went to Mexico, we self-studied ourselves. We did our own homework since Christmas vacation was around the corner, and it wasn't worth it for us to go to school in Mexico. So we took 3 months worth of homework. And so I said, okay, that's fine. So I went to school that day, and I talked to my teacher, Mrs. Young, a young Chinese teacher. She was real tall. Well, tall for a second grader, because she's actually short, but second grader, she looked tall to me. And anyway, a beautiful young Chinese teacher, and I told Mrs. Young, I said, Mrs. Young, we're going to Mexico. Can I have my 3 months worth of homework? And she looked at me, and her eyes, she rolled her eyes, and of course she had been through this routine with my 3 other siblings, because they've been through the second grade, so she knew the routine. But this time she said, you know what? Tell your dad and mom that I'm coming home today to visit them. And I said, oh, okay. So that day I ran home. We lived about 1.5 miles from school. You cross railroad tracks, packing sheds and all that. And in those days, you could walk to school for 1.5 miles. I guess these days you'll get arrested for child abuse if you let your kid walk 1.5 miles to school, right? But in those days, it was all right. I remember I ran that day as fast as I could. And I told my parents, I said, hey, this teacher's going to come today. And of course, you get two separate reactions from your parents, right? The first reaction is your dad. The first thing he starts doing, he starts taking off his belt, says, "All right, boy, what'd you do?" And I tell him, "I didn't do anything, I promise." He said, "It's going to be twice as bad if she tells me what you do, if you don't tell me, right?" And I said, I promise, I think it has to do with Mexico. And he said, "Okay, you better be right, boy." He said, "You better be right." I said, "Yeah." And of course, the other reaction is completely opposite from the mom, right? And if you're Hispanic, you would understand this more, I think. But you get that home alone reaction from mom, The teacher's coming, we got to clean the house. We got to cook a feast because la maestra's coming. Hispanics have this big respect for educators, and so all the bells and whistles come out when they figure that the maestra was coming. And as I remember, she came. We ate very good. I remember even telling my teacher, Mrs. Young, I said, "You ought to come more often," because we ate so well that day. And so she came, and after dinner and everything, in her words, and I remember she used terms that my parents couldn't understand because I sort of helped interpret. And she basically told my parents, she said, "Hey, you guys ought to stay in one place. Don't live a nomadic life. Set root in one place so the trees can grow strong." And obviously the trees were the kids, the 4 kids, because she had all 4 kids. And she said, "Look, your kids, I've had all 4 of them. They're kind of bright, and if you give them a chance, they can be something when they grow up." And my parents, to their credit, they actually took that advice. I mean, we still went to Mexico that year, but instead of coming back to Ontario and doing the migrant thing, we went straight to Stockton, and we started making Stockton our home. And then our 3-month trip started shrinking to about 3 weeks, centered around Christmas holidays, so we didn't miss a lot of school. And that's when our education started to get traction. And it was also the fact that, my parents, my mom, like I said, she would have made great psychologists. I mean, she also put the burden on us with respect to getting an education, because she would never say, "Oh, I hope you guys go to college. I hope you guys are going to do this." She always said, "When?" She sort of set that bit in our brain. And she always said, it was expected. We didn't know any better. Even though they only went to the 3rd grade, we knew that we had to go to college, else we were going to have to answer with our parents. So that's when we started getting traction in our education, because we started getting a little bit more stability. And I guess the other thing, the question would say is, well, then how was it that you actually became an astronaut, or what made you become an astronaut? And I think I could point to 3 events in my life that sort of took me to that point, or to this road that I'm now walking on. The first, I think I have to give thanks to my migrant farm working background, because I remember as a kid when we used to go work in the fields, we used to go in the darkness of night, right before dawn, before the sun comes up. You drive out to the fields. So you go out in the country away from light pollution. And my favorite part of the trip was, when we got there, I was able to get out. It was dark, and I could look up, and no light pollution from city lights or anything, and you could see the dark sky, and you could see the stars, and they almost like in 3D. They were so clear, and so I just had that attraction to it. Probably didn't hurt the fact that Star Trek was on during that time, but really that's what attracted me. And then the next one was when I was about 10 years old. Unfortunately, I'm old enough to remember the tail end of the Apollo program. And I remember Apollo 17 very clear. As you guys know, you guys are so young, you guys wouldn't know. But if you guys may have read in the history books, how's that? When there was an Apollo mission and there was a moonwalk, they would preempt programming on TV, and you would have folks like Walter Cronkite, narrate the moonwalk. And of course, the very last mission, Apollo 17, everybody would stop and watch the mission, and everybody in the U.S. and the world, I imagine, and the Hernandez family was no different. Only difference is the fact that we had an old black and white TV, and I'm not sure if you guys seen pictures of those old black and white TVs. But they're those big consoles, like a piece of furniture, they have a screen in the middle and integrated speakers, 4 little legs, and a big honking knob to change the channel. That was our TV. The only difference with ours was that ours was black and white and snowy picture. And I remember sometimes you lose that horizontal sync. You get that bar in the picture, and so the only way to fix it is, you hit it on the side and then it would stop. That was our TV. And, at that time there wasn't any satellite TV programming, but we did have cable TV, but God forbid we had cable because we couldn't afford it. So we had the next best thing. We had what was called rabbit ear antennas to increase reception on top of the TV. And so, of course, whenever something important came on, the family wanted a nice, clear picture, right? So guess who they called to adjust the TV? Since I was the youngest one, right? I was the official channel changer. And I know now why this happens, but, because I'm an electrical engineer. But as soon as I grabbed the antenna, guess what happened? The picture would improve, right? And guess what my dad would say? Stay there. So here I am in a contortionist mode trying to watch TV while trying to keep mom and dad and my rest of my siblings happy, and them watching a good picture, right? And I also remember, whenever we needed to change the channel, guess who the official channel changer was? It was yours truly as well. And I remember one day when I went up for the umpteenth time to change the channel, I figured I'd say, okay, I'm going to say something very subtle to my dad, because you had to understand my dad. You can't direct him to do anything, or you'll get yourself slapped. But I would say I'm going to do something very political and just kind of say it very subtle as he sent me for the 12th time to change the channel that day. I'd say, hey, Dad, they have those new TVs now that have remote control, and they're color too. And that went quickly. I said, I'm going to go quickly and change the channel so he doesn't get mad at me. So I changed it. And then I went back and sat down, and then he stood up and he looked at me, and he kind of like a little pitiful little shake in his head. He says, son, why do I need a remote control when I have you? And then he said, you want color? He says, you want color? He says, use your imagination. That way you can put any color you want. So he had a practical answer for that. We kept our TV for the next few years until it finally went out. That's when we got a new one. But I remember the images that we saw on TV of the astronauts walking on the moon. I remember seeing them so vividly. It's 1/6 the gravity. So when they were walking in their space, in their lunar suits, jumping and doing slow motion maneuvers, it kind of like captivated me. I sat down in front and watched. Then I would go outside and I would see the moon up there. And I would stare at it for a few minutes, come back and watch them again on TV. And then I would do that about 4 or 5 times. And that's when the actual idea for me came to say, that's what I want to be. I want to be an astronaut. I'm sure every 9, 10-year-old kid at that age wanted to be an astronaut too. And that's the other thing I got to give credit to my parents, is I shared that dream with them. And instead of them saying, hey, you're shooting too high, maybe you ought to just think about finishing high school, going to college, they actually nurtured that dream. That's why I think they would have made good psychologists, because they fed that dream, they nurtured it, and they said, anything's possible in this country. They said, just get yourself a good education and work hard. You put those 2 ingredients together, you can do whatever you want. Yeah, I'm sure, knowing how my dad is, I'm sure what he was thinking behind in the back of his head, he was probably saying, poor guy doesn't stand a chance, but let's not burst his bubble. But they actually did nurture that dream. And that's when, at the same time, my education started to gain traction. So the third event that sort of what I call sealed the deal for me to become an astronaut was when I was a senior in high school. And that was when I heard over the radio that some guy named Franklin Chang-Diaz got selected as the first Hispanic astronaut. And I said, wow. I said, Chang, okay, I wasn't too crazy about the Chang part, but the Diaz, I couldn't relate to the Diaz. I mean, that's like Hernandez. And so I started reading about him. And you know what I found out? I found out that there was many